British Baker recently published an article looking at the evidence on bread and bloating. It found that products made by the Chorleywood Bread Process did not cause bloating and gastrointestinal discomfort compared to other bread making processes. Alexander Waugh, Director General of UK Flour Millers Association nabim, spoke to Dr Elizabeth Weichselbaum of the British Nutrition Foundation about her findings.
So, Lizzie, you've spent a lot of time looking at the evidence. What can you tell us about bread and bloating? What does the literature say?
So we looked at two different things. We looked at bread in general and bloating, and then modern bread in terms of bloating. And basically, I didn't find any evidence to support claims, that breads, whether either made traditionally or in the more modern way, causes bloating. So there's just no evidence to support the claims in healthy people.
It would seem that there's a lot of rumour that isn't substantiated, at least by written evidence.
Yes, that's right. So I think most of the claims are based on anecdotal evidence, if you want to call it, but there's no published evidence in peer-reviewed journals that supports those claims.
Okay, and we sometimes hear, don't we, that bread made in different ways is more or less healthy. I mean, did you find anything of that sort in your trial?
We looked at that as well, and there are some studies, for example, that looked at the nutrient contents of breads made in the traditional way and bread made with the Chorleywood Bread Process. And basically, because it's often claimed, modern bread doesn't contain any nutrients anymore, but actually there's no difference between the two, between breads made in the modern way or the more traditional way. So what has more of an impact on the nutrient content is the type of flour you use. For example, you would have more fiber in wholemeal breads compared to white bread, but also the substitution of nutrients. So the nutrients that are lost during milling are being substituted, and so that has a bigger impact on the nutrient content than the bread process.
So whether you use white flour or brown flour
yes.
or wholemeal is really what matters, rather
yes.
than the way in which you make the bread.
Exactly.
So we sometimes hear that white bread is just sort of empty calories. Is that so? I mean, does bread provide us with any nutrients?
Bread provides us actually with a number of nutrients. One of the main ones is dietary fiber, and interestingly, white bread on a population level provides us with more fiber compared to wholemeal bread, because it's really popular. So even though on a gram per gram basis it has less dietary fiber compared to wholemeal bread, it still provides a significant amount, and altogether we get about 20% of the whole fiber from bread in our diet. We get a lot of other nutrients. We get, for example, almost 20% of calcium from breads, 50% of iron, and also more than 10% of other nutrients, for example, thiamine or magnesium. Okay,
so bread provides a lot more than just energy.
Yes.
So, I mean, sometimes we hear about protein, and we talk about carbohydrate diets and protein diets. I mean, where does bread fit into that?
So some people believe that the way to lose weight is by cutting out carbohydrates, but that's clearly not supported by any evidence-based guidelines. First of all, if you cut out a whole food group, you basically cut out a number of nutrients in the if you cut out bread, for example, as I said, a fifth
you're losing all those things.
Yes, so you would cut all that out. The other thing is, on a gram per gram basis, carbohydrates contains just half the amount of calories compared to fat, for example. So if you eat a low carb diet that can sometimes be quite high in fat, you actually eat quite a lot of calories from quite fatty foods. So it's not always effective, and the reason why people sometimes do lose weight when they cut out carbohydrates is simply because they eat fewer calories and not because they cut out carbohydrates. So and people usually can't stick to that kind of diet very long anyway, so altogether it's just not a good way of losing weight. It's just much better to overall cut down your calorie intake and not cut out a whole food group. It's never a good idea.
Sometimes people talk about gluten intolerance and celiac and make a link between indigestibility of bread, in particular, they always think about bread, and gluten. Did you find anything when you looked at that? Or?
We also found studies where some researchers looked at different types of bread. For example, they looked at bread made with baker's yeast and bread made with sourdough.
Okay.
And they found that using sourdough breaks down gluten a bit more than if you use only baker's yeast. However, if you look at the levels, there's still the levels of gluten remaining in the sourdough are still way too high to be suitable for celiac patients. So even if the gluten is broken down a little bit more, it would be basically
still too high for celiacs.
Yes, way too high.
And is that comparing sourdough with Chorleywood bread or sourdough with traditional bread?
No, it's just sourdough with traditional bread.
Okay, so that would apply in any country, not just in the UK.
Actually those studies were carried out in Italy.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? That this celiac phenomenon, if it is one, is going on elsewhere in the world. It's not just in the UK.
Yes, it's not just in the UK. So that's worldwide, and as you say, it's estimated about 1% of the population suffer that. However, what's really important is that people who think they have an intolerance or also an allergy to wheat, for example, that they shouldn't just, self-diagnose and just cut out the bread or other foods altogether, but really go to see a GP and get tested with standardized methods. It's really important.
So Alex, we've heard the evidence from Dr Elizabeth there. What do you think the industry could do in terms of dispelling this myth?
It's a tricky one, Martin, isn't it? Because you can't really tell people that what they think makes them feel more comfortable doesn't. But I think there are so many good things about bread that we could be talking about, and we should try and resist the temptation, even within the industry, for one part of the industry to knock the other.
Yeah.
So we've heard from Lizzie how important bread is in terms of the nutrients it provides, the place it has in the diet. And I think we can be a lot more positive about that, about the sort of the iron, the calcium, the B vitamins, the magnesium, the other trace elements that bread provides in whatever form, whether it's made in the high street on a high street baker, whether it's made in a plant bakery and sliced up, whether it's sourdough. They all have the same nutrients.
So, but basically a more holistic view of our bread industry in the UK.
Yeah, and I don't think anyone should expect consumers to choose only one type of bread. One of the fantastic things about our industry is that huge variety we now have. Yeah. And really we should be encouraging people to take advantage of that. Why not celebrate that fantastic diversity and ingenuity that our industry has, and the essential goodness of what we make.